Welcome to Boulder, Colorado. I'm here at Coop Studios to record the season 2 finale of You Don't Need This podcast. Wait till you see this. The legendary Brad Feld's gonna come and join me sitting in studio. We'll be right here. Studio A. You may not need this podcast, but you are in the right place. And this is a special episode recorded in the wild. I'm your host, Ben McDougal, with my AI companion and co-host, BenBot. While this episode will sound a bit different than when we're in studio, know it was brewed from within the entrepreneurial ecosystem as we continue learning with students, entrepreneurs, intrapreneurs, and community builders. If you're a curious leader thirsty enough to make a ruckus, welcome to another caffeinated conversation brewed to keep you building. Enjoy. Welcome, my friends. This is going to be a bop. I am in Boulder with Brad Feld. Dude, thank you for being here.
You're welcome.
What a gift this is going to be. What a treat. The season 2 finale, episode 100. Wow, I feel like I'm in the mountains. I actually am in the mountains. Came to your backyard, my friend.
I see what you did
there. Well, we are going to have a fun time. I am challenged to think through what topics to talk to you about. Such a legendary leader, an author, venture capitalist, and I mean, I don't need to introduce this person very much because there's so many people that you've impacted in so many different ways. But why don't we, in case someone hasn't met Brad Feld before, you know how this works. A brief introduction would be fun to hear.
Let's see. I've been a founder of a number of companies, going back to my very first company in the 1980s.
That was over in Boston?
In Boston. I grew up in Dallas, Texas. My parents still live there. The little-known fact that I use is the little-known fact all the time. So now it's not so much a little-known fact, was I was born in Blytheville, Arkansas. I started my first company when I was in school. I sold it to a public company in 1993. I became their chief technology officer. Did that for a couple of years, mostly just worked with the co-chairman of that company, the two co-chairmen on M&A and helping them with all the technical stuff on the deal side. Didn't know anything about deals before I started working with them, so it was an unbelievably awesome learning experience. Made about 40 angel investments in 3 years with all the money I'd made from selling that first company. Today, making a dozen angel investments a year is not a big deal. In the mid-'90s, it was bizarre. Like, who is that strange guy?
Well, even starting companies in school, let alone exiting, that was weird at the time.
Yeah, it was not the norm. I accidentally became a venture capitalist. I didn't really plan it. I was doing all these angel investments. I ended up getting connected with this company called SoftBank that in the mid-'90s kind of nobody really knew about. Today, I think most people know about SoftBank. And with a group of people that included some really awesome friends to this day. The three in particular that I still feel incredibly close to are Jerry Colonna, who's well-known, one of my best friends, Fred Wilson, who's an extremely successful VC with the firm USV in New York, and also just awesome person on many fronts, and then Heidi Roizen, who was one of my partners at what evolved from SoftBank to Mobius, and a dear friend when I was in the Bay Area, which was 3 out of 4 weeks a month, because I lived in Colorado. I would stay at Heidi's house with her and her family. She had a room that she was very good friends with Bill Gates. She had a room that I shared with Bill.
No way.
Not at the same time.
And I just had this quick visual of you guys in bunk beds.
No. But apparently Bill would occasionally stay at Heidi's house. And we would always joke as to whether it was called the Bill Gates room or the Brad Feld room. But that was mostly just because we could.
Yeah. When was the urge to write your first book? I mean, you've written so many now.
Yeah. So the first book was written in it came out in 2011. It was written 2010, 2011. That book was Do More Faster. I wrote it with David Cohen.
Yeah, I enjoyed reading that.
Yeah, and I didn't know how to write a book. No fucking idea what to do. I got lucky. I happened to know a board member at Wiley. That board member I didn't know him. He was good friends with Len Fassler, who has passed away a few years ago, but I talk about a lot in this latest book, GiveFirst. And is one of the
opening quote. Yeah,
it's one of the two co-chair that I talked about at this company that bought mine. And Len and I did several companies together after he bought my first company, and just the amount I learned from Len was extraordinary. And he knew this guy who was the chair, or not the chair, but on the board at the time of Wiley. And I was kind of thinking about maybe writing a book, and we got together in New York.
And Wiley's a publisher, sure.
Yep. We got together somewhere in New York at a diner that Len and I would go to in near Union Square. And Matt was the guy, and we sort of got to know each other. And he's like, "Hey, we'd love to publish, a book or two." And what I said to him was, "Well, I'd actually sent an idea for a book to Wiley already, and they rejected me." And Matt said, "I think I can do something about that." So I got connected with my editor at the time, Bill Falloon, who was really, really helpful in helping me understand and learn how to write a book. David and I were motivated to write this book because Techstars now by 2010 had started to turn into a thing. We started it in 2006. We ran a program in Boulder in 2007, and then another program in Boulder in 2008. 2008, we had a lot of people from around the world say, "Hey, this Techstars thing's cool. Can you come run one in our city?" And our response was a polite version of, "We don't have any idea if this is a good thing or not." Like, we really don't know. Like, we definitely had an awesome experience the first year, but we screwed up a lot of stuff, and we're learning about a lot of stuff. So we just want to do it again one more time before we even think about anything other than it, just to see if it's a good thing. But we'll tell you everything we know about how we did it. So we kind of really open sourced, to the extent that you can open source an idea, open source the construct of how an accelerator worked. They weren't called accelerators back then.
Well, that's one thing for listeners. This is before accelerators were common. And I'm curious, if you fast forward, the evolution of this form of accelerating folks. And now you see venture studios and Incubator. There's so many different varieties. But how do you feel like it has evolved over the years?
Yeah, the form of the thing changed in a lot of ways, and in other ways didn't. And actually, the through line tracing back in time was actually to a thing called an incubator that became popular around the internet bubble in the 2000 timeframe. And an incubator wasn't invented in the internet bubble. Incubators existed going back to late 50s. I think the very first business incubator was in 1959 or something. I'm trying to remember the history. I don't have it in my head. And they were usually associated with universities. They were usually sort of controlled and structured around scientific ideas and innovation that you're trying to spin out from the university. But in the dot-com bubble, lots of entities, venture firms, and others created these incubators, including SoftBank. We had an incubator that was extraordinarily well named. We called it HotBank, which was a dumb name. And we had one in the Bay Area in our office at Mountain View, and we had one in Boulder in the office that we had in Superior. For people that know Boulder, Colorado, we had an office in Superior. If you drive down 36, it's the two-story building on the left as you're entering Boulder, where you see Superior Liquors. We had the top floor.
Nice.
About 30,000 square feet. And, we didn't really think it through. I was kind of trying to figure out what the challenge was.
Yeah.
What was happening was, at the time, companies were being funded at this incredible pace. And not dissimilar to any of the waves that we've seen since, today's wave is an AI wave where there's just this incredible amount of money being thrown at companies. At the time, they're being thrown at internet companies. Many of these companies raised way too much money, way too early with no ideas. At some point, it was as long as you have a pulse and you can spell the word internet, you can get funding. It got pretty nutty. And it wasn't at the peak. We started this before the peak. Our idea was we had a few ideas, but we knew lots of founders. And we just kind of wanted to create community around it. So what we did was instead of trying to extract money from the companies as they were starting, we funded them as a VC, and we often gave them free space. As the companies got a little bit bigger, so it became more than 2 or 3 or 4 people, we had them pay essentially to help us subsidize the cost of the space. But there were no fees. There was nothing else associated with it. And the premise of these incubators, and a lot of venture funds eventually did these. One that was very famous was called Idea Lab. This was Bill Gross's company, and he had this huge facility where he came up with a lot of ideas, but also kind of had founders come in and work on ideas. And it was really exciting. I mean, really exciting.
Yeah.
And a ton of fun.
Right.
Until it wasn't. So the point at which it stopped being fun was when, kind of the music stopped on the internet bubble, and all of a sudden financing was really hard. And now you had all of these companies that had no money, that were taking up space, that were dying, but weren't really dealing with the reality of dying because you were subsidizing the rent. And as an investor, you were in there all day, every day with them, because that was my office too.
Right.
And so like the energy dynamics had a pretty big...
I could see tension growing.
Yeah, it wasn't even tension. It was just a reverse shift. It was just went from like being super cool and exciting and fun to like, wow, this is really fucking hard every day. That was the incubator thing. So when time passed, right, and when we started Techstars in 2006, there really wasn't this construct. Y Combinator had run a couple of programs prior. And they had done this thing, I think 1 or 2 programs in Boston and maybe a program in the Bay Area. And the construct wasn't well defined. David was very, very interested in what was happening and kind of, reached out as one is wont to do, saying, hey, I'd like to do something like this in Boulder. And the response that he got was kind of, go away, leave me alone, like this is our thing, which was fine. And so he, as a good entrepreneur, said, yeah, screw it. I'll go figure out how to do this myself. I didn't know David. And it's a story in the book we've talked about a lot.
Random days.
Comes from this construct that I was doing called Random Day.
Yeah.
And I did that because I needed a way to just meet with lots of people that were now trying to meet with me all the time. And that was a thing that had been going on for a long time. But if I'm responded to with all the intros I had and all the people who wanted to get together with me and all the people that knew me in Boulder that I didn't know and all the people that were coming to Boulder to meet with me that I didn't know or were traveling through Colorado and knew I was here. If all I did was do meetings with them, all I do is do meetings. Like I literally would have no time to do anything. So I created this construct where once a month I would do 15-minute meetings. I usually did 15 or 20 of them. And my goal became to learn one thing in each meeting and to help the person with one thing. And so the meetings were productive for me. In 15 minutes, you can only get so bored if you're concentrating on trying to learn a thing and do a thing that's productive.
Well, and with the new book, GiveFirst, you talk about how this helped you imagine how to listen, right? And learn along the way. And that energy of accelerating others is unmatched. So you probably were able to connect dots and even being generous in that listening ear. But to have the origin story of Techstars brewed out of that, I think is magic.
Well, you said 2 things that are really important. The first is this idea of learning how to listen. And I think I've always been a reasonably good listener. All my stories are a little too long. It's a genetic problem that I got from my dad. Everything, just going a little too long. You say, do an introduction, at the beginning.
We got to the origins of Techstars.
Yeah. I'm like, I could say like, enough already.
I got all these notes,
let's get going. And which is totally like, again, everybody's got their strengths and weaknesses. One of mine is that. But I did think I was a good listener. One of my strengths is I'm good at consuming a lot of information and synthesizing the information. I'm not a visual learner. I'm not an auditory learner. I'm a visual learner. Okay. So I don't really learn that well by listening. The way I learn is by reading.
One of your 4 favorite things, I heard you say.
It is. But like even in college, I figured out at some point that I was getting way more out of spending the time reading all the material than I was sitting through lectures. And so I sort of figured out the minimal number of lectures I had to go to for any particular class, which ones were really the important ones.
Yeah.
And I used my time instead to really read and not study, different, but really consume the information, because that's how my brain sort of put it together. And as a result, kind of the combination of being a reader and a good synthesizer, again, I felt I was good at listening, but I definitely had a lot of trouble when I was sitting and listening, not responding. I had a lot of trouble not trying to like interject and poke around and try to get more, because I was having trouble, when I reflect, I would have trouble latching on to the key idea that it wasn't in front of me. The thing that was really difficult for me was if somebody was presenting slides and talking. And this was chronic, it's been chronic as a VC to be on the receiving end of this, but it was chronic in society until probably 2006, 2007. I mean, there was a book that came out called Death by PowerPoint or something like that. And it was really like the hit over the head of like, just stop already.
Yeah.
Like either give me the material and sit there quiet, let's sit there quietly and let me look at it, or don't give me the material and talk to me.
Well, it's like too much words on a slide, right? You're giving the audience a choice to either listen or read. And in that case, you're trying to consume it in such a short amount of time. My guess is that the participant would be maybe overloading because they felt that pressure and excitement to share. It might have been less is more.
It was hard. And it actually became very interesting. There's probably people that remember sitting in meetings with me where they're pitching me and I just close my eyes. I don't close my eyes to go to sleep. I close my eyes because I'm concentrating. Like I'm actually listening more intently to try to make sure I understand it, because you don't even have to have too many words on the slide. You get some pretty pictures. I'm looking at the pretty pictures and I'm thinking about stuff versus listening to you. So Random Day really changed that with me, because Random Day didn't have any props.
Oh, they weren't bringing slides.
No.
I got the sense that you're at a coffee shop and people are being kind of awkward with their computer like in front of you or something like that. Oh, I mean, you were talking, okay.
People would often bring stuff. They bring a thing, they try to hand it to me. And when I tell the David story, the David Techstars story, I'll describe what happened. But, people would open up their laptop and they say, no, don't show me something. Let's just talk. Or somebody would slide a deck to me with a deck in front of them, and I'd say, you know what? No, keep the deck. I don't want the paper. Let's just talk.
Nice.
Right? And it sort of forced people. Eventually, people understood. Word got around that was doing. I blogged about how to do a better Random Day with me.
Yeah.
And that became the thing. And some people came prepared, and some people didn't. But what happened was constraining the time to 15 minutes. And when I say constraining the time to 15 minutes, I had a kitchen timer. You remember those wind-up ones?
Oh, yeah, the white ones.
I started with that just to make the point.
Yeah, I love it.
And eventually, did it on my phone. And that 15 minutes, it's not very long. It goes fast. And if you're concentrating, you really can get to it. But if you're not concentrating, all of a sudden you turn around like, oh, shit. 15 minutes, and I forgot the guy's name or the gal's name, and I don't know what the fuck we're talking about, right? So
I don't have the beeper in here,
right? It really helped me change my sort of focus and concentration in that. The experience with David showed up. It took him 3 months to get on my Random Day calendar, because it was a public calendar, so it was a big backlog. It wasn't like it was always open spots. It was like it filled up, and then.
Were they at coffee shops, at an office environment? Did you always move it around?
Yeah, 50-50. About half the time we did it in our office downtown, and about the half the time I do it at a random place.
Okay.
And usually coffee shops, but a random place that was easy. I actually like the random places better than my office because of two things. One is it wasn't as awkward as people sort of stacked up because they had something else they could do. They could sort of wander around, talk to other people, or have a cup of coffee or whatever, versus like sitting in our lobby.
Right. It could be feeling like an interview type vibe.
That's right. Like those bad movies where there's like people waiting, people waiting for the
next.
Okay, it's your turn now.
Yeah, no doubt.
That was uncool. So I like that. The other is that if I'm talking to you and it's really 15 minutes, and we get to, and the things on the desk, so you see it saying, 2 minutes left, 1 minute left. I had them be countdowns rather than count ups. When there's 2 minutes left, you kind of locked in. It's like it's time to like get to the thing.
Right.
Because when the buzzer goes off and it says 0, it doesn't like roll over and now be red and say 01, 02. It's like 0 and it's awkward and you're like, we're done. Like there's like other people out there waiting is different than there's people sort of hovering around.
That's cool. How many people do you think you collided with through that construct?
So I did it for a decade. I probably did it.
I mean, it feels like it's.
Let's say 8 months a year. I did it 8. I didn't do it 12 times a year. Let's say I did 8 times a year for a decade, so 80 times. So at least 10 people each time. So at least 800 people, 1,000 people.
What was your favorite part? Besides the learning and listening, I think is something that you spoke about.
At the end of the days, I was tired.
But it was like cerebral exhaustion.
Yeah, it wasn't physical. That's right. I was just tired. Like I was kind of done. I felt like I could live a value that I was espousing that was not the easiest to live, which was to be accessible. And it especially was reinforcing as I became busier. One of the things that's always annoyed the shit out of me is gatekeepers and friction in the system. Anybody that has worked with me knows that I believe that networks are fundamental to like both success and the excitement in life, and that your power on the network is not simply how important you are, and it's not how many connections you have. Your power on the network is the multiple of the connections you have times the information flow across those connections. And it's very much a one-to-one dynamic versus a one-to-many dynamic. So you think about so many people that end up being one-to-many where they're broadcasting to their fans or whatever. And it's fine. There's value in that.
Well, it's an and thing, not an or thing, right?
Yeah.
You're blogging since so long. You've got books. Those are ways that people can catch up to speed with your thoughts.
That's right.
And then,
but
in addition,
the real impact is that one-to-one when information flows back and forth, and it's not one-directional. Like I learn a lot from that. One of the challenges with a lot of one-to-many things is you're not learning, right? You're sending information out, but the feedback loops are hard. Now in 2025, it's better than it was in 2012 or 2013. It's sort of the beginning of social networks and how these, not the absolute beginning, but how the wiring was starting to work in a professional sense and more than just, I'm connected to you, you're connected to me. Here, look how many friends and followers I have.
That was back when it was fun. There was like a delight in seeing an old high school friend and connecting. And now it's evolved into something that feels more almost like a task.
Professionally, it's work.
Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah.
So I think I espouse this construct that to be a leader in a startup community, you have to be inclusive of anyone who wants to engage. It's, one of the principles of the Boulder thesis. And as somebody who was visible, who was in high demand, who was very busy, who traveled a lot because, I invested all over the country, and who had a lot of things, that I was interested in. I also, I was a long distance runner, so, that consumed time, like a bunch of things that made it harder to, as more people wanted access to me, to still be accessible. And I think I did a really good job of that via email. So, responsive to people all the time on email. That was a high value of mine, to kind of basically always respond to anyone, except for the things that were clearly mail merge or resume.
Yeah, dear insert name.
Oh, well, and there was an awful lot of dear insert names in my life, but eventually you start to,
Sure.
you get that you can tell, and now of course email tells you that unsubscribe from the pitch deck that just got sent to you and to everybody else. So, but I was very responsive, but it became harder and harder and harder to show up and to be involved in things and to engage. Another thing I learned is I really much prefer one-on-one or with Amy, a small group, right?
Another item on the favorite thing list.
Just small group.
Running and writing.
Well, writing, being with Amy.
Yeah. This is great.
And the small groups, which are one-on-one or, a group of 4, maybe 5, I enjoy that a lot. Once it gets above 6 people at a table,
it's event management.
It gets hard for me. And I didn't really understand what was hard about it for a long time. And I was I'm very much in lots of extroverted situations, lots of big groups, hundreds of people, many, many more. And I function fine in those environments, but they make me exhausted. Mm-hmm. And I don't like it that much, right? So it's not that I hate it, but like on the happy meter,
it's not on that list.
It's not above 5.
Yeah.
And that was a big part of my work world. And so being able to figure out ways to engage one-on-one with people who I didn't know, didn't have relationships with, didn't have a thing to do was really rewarding and satisfying. And kind of one of the things that evolved from it that was kind of fun was I learned how to be in big groups. So for example, we just had our annual general meeting, our AGM at Foundry. We had, a bunch of LPs here in Boulder for the day. We had our advisory board meeting, which is a smaller group of them, but still like 20 people at the dinner. And I sit at the end of the table, not the head of the table, the end. And what it allows me to do by sitting at the end of the table is really have a scoped down set of interactions. For example, when I'm sitting in the middle of the table, the middle of the long side, there's too much stuff going on. There's too many conversations. I can't focus. I'm distracted. I can't.
It almost feels selfish to talk to one person because it's such a group and dynamic.
I'm not sure I have the emotional thing around it, but it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Like you can't sort of segment out. But if you're at the very end, there's only 4 or 5 people you can actually talk to without like having to shout across the table. So it's a much more natural thing. So I learned a lot of stuff like that. And this really ties all the way back to, so what was the benefit of doing things like that? There were a lot of benefits of doing random days. And some of them were tangible, like, Techstars emerging from it with David coming to a random day and that being the origin story of Techstars. I learned a lot of stuff about things I knew nothing about. I definitely met other people than David that turned into business relationships that were completely random.
The variety of that perpetual learning had to be nourishing.
Yeah. And, some of it generated random, just sort of random friendships. Like there are definitely things that, 5 years later, somebody would send me a note and say, hey, we had random day. You probably don't remember me. Yeah, I kind of do. What was it about? Oh yeah, we talked about that. I'm working on this thing now. Oh, cool. And I just want to say thanks. It was really helpful. I'm like, great. And eventually it gets to, what can I do to be helpful in this moment? And a lot of the times what happens is different than, when you have this sort of business level interaction, which is that there was an appreciation for just being there and just being willing to engage. And so you sort of skip the selling part of the other person. The other person's not pitching me on, here's why I have such a great idea. And they get quickly to the, I'm about to be out of money and I don't know what to fucking do. Or, I have a real problem with the technology. I can't get this figured out. And, I'm just looking for somebody that can help me with this. Or, 100 other things like that. But it gets past that sort of performative first layer to substance. And for me, 100% of the time, I'd much rather just get to the substance so that we can try to make some progress. And I don't need to feel my own emotional, like, oh, I did a good job. You say, thank you so much. That was so, no. What can we do to make this turn into a thing? Like, that's the motive force for me.
I love that. Let's shift gears a little bit. I mean, you mentioned the Boulder thesis and startup communities. The book comes to mind when you say that. And the Startup Community Way is one of my top recommended books, especially for community leaders, people in economic development, of course, founders, and letting entrepreneurs lead as well. But one thing I think you've talked about a lot is helping support the shared language, the taxonomy, the terms that are used. And I think it's valuable. It's a nice head start when we're comparing apples to apples versus trying to talk about something that can be abstract, or in the Startup Community Way, leaning into the complex adaptive systems. How about a little quickfire? Before that though, I just rattled off my love for startup communities and the Startup Community Way. What's up, Ian? I just want to let you riff on what comes to mind when you think about these two relics.
Well, one of the things that came out of starting to play around with GiveFirst and this new book, and GiveFirst, of course, is a phrase that's been around for a while.
Hashtag.
Yeah, that's right. I hadn't really processed the number of phrases that really were sourced by me and or things I was involved in. Startup communities being one of them. That phrase didn't exist before I wrote the first Startup Communities book. And I came up with the phrase very deliberately. Like, it wasn't, I'll just think about what a good phrase is. I was sort of in this place where, as I was working on the book, I had the construct of what I wanted. And I was really annoyed with some of the language. I didn't like the phrase entrepreneurial ecosystem, because the phrase entrepreneurial ecosystem was kind of owned by government and academia. And I was trying to write something that put the founder at the center of the thing and really made all of the other participants in the thing, including venture capitalists, what became labeled as feeders, and reinforcing this notion that the founders have to be the leaders. And at the time I called them entrepreneurs. Now I always called founders, because the word entrepreneur has been distorted to mean so many different things.
Just a quick pit stop. When you think about small businesses versus maybe scalable startups, are we still calling each owner of the business founders?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, if you started, the guy Peter who lives here that owns Tiaco, if anybody knows the restaurant, it's a taco shop that's been around for, I don't know, a decade. He just celebrated his 10-year anniversary. And it was a place that my partners and I at Foundry would regularly frequent for our Monday lunches. Nice. And there's some great stories about big deals that we did there. Peter's a founder. He's absolutely a founder, even though he has a small business that's a small restaurant.
It's interesting because small business owners sometimes don't even think of themselves as entrepreneurs, let alone founders.
That was the difference, though. I think founder is a much more accessible word.
Okay.
And so those small business owners didn't think of themselves as entrepreneurs. Oh, that's not for me.
Yeah.
Versus when you start talking about founders, like, yeah, I started this thing.
So how do you compare startup communities with entrepreneurial ecosystems? Are they synonyms?
No, they're different things.
I think of the entrepreneurial ecosystem as a broader umbrella, inclusive of a lot of other aspects within the environment. And then startup communities it feels like it's within the ecosystem.
Yeah, you got it totally right. So the startup community has one goal. There is one thing the startup community exists for, and it's to help the founders. That's it. The founders are at the center. The startup community exists to help the founders be successful. The entrepreneurial ecosystem is a bigger concentric circle that includes all of the active participants in the ecosystem. And when they're focused on the startup community, their engagement with the startup community is to help the founders be successful. And they have lots of other motivations in the context of the entrepreneurial ecosystem, right? If you're an academic and you're in a university and you're participating in entrepreneurship and innovation, in addition to helping founders be successful, you're educating students and you're trying to create within the university maybe some mechanisms for generating innovation. And you might be writing papers about innovation and entrepreneurship, and you might be trying to be a thought leader around, whatever. But when you sort of zone back into this startup community, your focus in that is none of those things. Your focus is to do things that are helpful to the founders. In the first book, and it's back to this linkage of the distinction between the two of them, I made a mistake that was, in hindsight, kind of funny, but took a while for me to sort of unscramble, which is I defined the leaders as being entrepreneurs or founders. So the leaders are founders. The feeders, another label, are everyone else that participates in the startup community. And it was fun because it really, like at some point about a year after the book was out and the language was really out there and people were talking about it, I'd have a lot of people in, big companies, government, investors, service providers, university, whatever, whenever I was talking or traveling around doing stuff with this stuff. And they'd say, I'm a feeder. Like, as a badge of, I get it. I get what you're saying. What I screwed up was there is another leader in the startup community that is not a founder. And we eventually, Ian and I came up with the label. I think Ian may have been the one that came up with the word for it, was instigator. Ian Hathaway being the co-author of the Startup Community Way.
I remember that addition.
That's right. So we added in this idea that you can be an instigator, and the leaders are entrepreneurs and instigators. Now, what an instigator is somebody who works for one of the feeder organizations and plays a leadership role in the startup community, of which there are many. And, the label for that also superset for a lot of people was this idea of being a startup community champion or leader, that sort of thing. And I just hadn't given a voice to that. And that was a mistake. Another sort of meta part of that was I realized that the leadership in a startup community has to be people. And the entrepreneurial ecosystem consists of organizations.
Oh, okay.
And so it's another distinction. When you think about people, they're the ones in the startup community, and the entrepreneurial ecosystem are the organizations. And if you look at like entrepreneurial ecosystem maps and academic research around this, of which Ian and I had a lot of fun with, because Ian read every single one of those papers and he'd like try to get me to pay attention to some of the things. And I'd be like, you just keep reading those papers. And he'd then send me a graphic and I'm like, clever graphic. And, eventually some of it sunk in. But most of it is really, most of that kind of discussion around ecosystems is around organizations, not around people. And my unbelievably awesome experience over the last 15 years in startup communities is they're just about people. That's it. And by the way, that's just a ton of fun.
Yeah, right. It's wild, the amount of collisions. I would suggest that my experience with 1 Million Cups every Wednesday for 13 years, that is why I'm weird. Like the energy is just easy to enjoy. What happens when you have too many of these organizations and these people that want to help and not enough people doing?
Yeah. Well, I actually don't...
I see that a lot, actually.
Yeah, I think the key starting point for the separation is separating the people from the organizations. I think that one of the reasons why startup communities in different places, and it's worth saying, I've been a proponent of this idea that a startup community can exist in any city, anywhere in the world, and that it's not the only thing a city needs. It's just another characteristic of the city. It's another thing that a healthy city needs over a long period of time.
When you use the word city, I wonder if you think of a population number required where you have critical mass. Because rural environments have very vibrant startup communities in some cases, but you get under 25,000 people and there might not be
I can give a good example in the U.S. and good learning for me around that. So I started by saying at least 100,000 people. So Boulder's 100,000 people. The Boulder County, which includes a number of other cities, is about 300,000 people. Denver is at 2.5 million people, which is about 45 minutes away. Denver and Boulder are separate startup communities.
Sure.
They behave differently. They have different cultures. They're connected.
They're circuit. Yeah, for
right?
sure.
But they are different. So it's not that Boulder is part of the Denver startup community and Denver is part of the Boulder startup community. They are part of the bigger geography of the Colorado startup community. But I kind of was sticking with this 100,000. And every now and then, somebody would say, well, my town has 67,000 people. Are we too small? And I'm like, all right, 50,000 people. Like, it wasn't an absolute number.
Of course.
And then I had an experience that was really powerful, which is Amy and I have as our primary house now is in Aspen, Colorado. We still have a place in Boulder. We spend a couple months a year in Boulder. We spend summers in Aspen. And the Aspen experience, where most people probably know of Aspen, Colorado. A bunch of people probably come to Aspen, Colorado for a ski trip or something like that. The permanent residence in Aspen is 5,000 people. It's a tiny little town. Amy grew up in Fairbanks, Alaska, which is 40,000 people. And we have a house in Homer, Alaska, which is the southern part of Alaska. And
do you have to take a plane to get there?
No, you drive all the way down.
I just think that's like more common than car driving
up
there.
It is. But you fly into Anchorage and you drive 200 miles down the Sterling Highway.
Oh, wow. How often do you go there?
Well, we used to go every year for a month. So starting in about 2000, we went every summer for a month. And we had one summer maybe or 2 summers where we spent 2 months there. And we haven't been there since COVID. Her sister's been living in the house, and we've just been loving being in Aspen in the summer, so we haven't felt like going. So
we've got on a rabbit hole with thinking of Alaska. That's easy, and Aspen too. But going back to kind of
let me come back to
mass,
that story. So Homer's 5,000 people.
Yeah.
So I could kind of relate to a city of 5,000 people, or a town if you want to call it that. And I'm like, that's too small. So if you know Colorado, the Roaring Fork Valley is a series of connected cities that start at Aspen and go Aspen, one that's not really a city, but that's kind of famous is Woody Creek. That's where Hunter S. Thompson hung out. Then you get to Basalt, which is actually turning into a pretty vibrant little city. Then you get to Carbondale. Then you get to Glenwood Springs.
That's where my brother-in-law was married. That's time I was in that lineup.
Yeah, so it's about a 50, 60 mile stretch from one end to the other. And the total population of the Roaring Fork Valley, I don't know exact number, but let's say it's 50,000 people. And Roaring Fork Valley is big enough to have a vibrant startup community. So between founders in Aspen, Carbondale, Basalt, Glenwood Springs, you've got co-working spaces now, you've got event spaces. And yeah, there's, the Carbondale people are proud about being in Carbondale, but the Aspen people are perfectly happy to come to Carbondale, and the Carbondale people are perfectly happy to come to Aspen. If you think about a place like Los Angeles or San Francisco or even New York, like the physical footprint, and I'll use the Bay Area as an example. You can talk about Silicon Valley. It's not a city. There's no city called Silicon Valley. There actually might be one somewhere, but certainly not the one that everybody calls Silicon Valley. Sure. And if you go from San Francisco to San Jose on a day if aliens came and took all the cars away and you drove just from one end to the other with no cars, I think the drive is still an hour and a half. And if you toss cars down there, it could be 2 or 3 hours. And so that's a pretty long spread to call a thing Silicon Valley. So it's not the Menlo Park startup community. It's not the Palo Alto startup community, although there are places like Menlo Park and Palo Alto have incredible density of activity. But that geographic spread can be more. And so in rural communities, in small towns, what I encourage is think about putting a circle around the geography, right? Pull up Google Maps, put a circle around the geography, zoom the circle out or zoom the map in until you get a population that's 50,000 people. And that's your geography that you're playing with. And you might move the map around a little to make sure you get the right whatever. Again, let me go back to the last comment, which is inclusive. There's a lot of startup communities that are binary stars. I think people know what a binary, hopefully people know what a binary star is. If you don't, it's these two stars that orbit around each other.
Dude, I saw some at the Lowell Observatory.
Isn't it awesome? So I saw some a couple of months ago. Amy and I went to the KIT Observatory because we winter in Tucson now. And Tucson has 4 amazing observatories, and we're sort of systematically spending time at each one.
Nice. We were in Sedona and then cruised up into Flagstaff and had the Dyer telescope.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
I mean, the astronomy in that part of the world is incredible. Like they
discovered Pluto there.
Yeah, people don't really understand how much of that is going on in Arizona, in that area, and it's because of the elevation and the skies. And so Tucson is a dark sky city, which, even Boulder doesn't have a lot of light pollution in at night, but it still has some, and it's on the edge of a big city. You drive through Tucson, you sit in your backyard, and you're like in the middle of nowhere.
Have you ever been to a star party?
I don't know what a star party is.
So this is like camping, but at each campsite you have 1 to 3 different telescopes.
That'd be fun.
And so
they're
it's
aimed
like
at something different.
Yeah.
So no, I have not been to a star party, but
we said inclusive and then binary stars, and we got a little sidetrack.
But that's the fun of you, Ben, and that's the fun of this podcast. And hopefully, whoever's listening is not shaking their head saying, "Time for me to stop now."
Well, we're usually at that 30 to 45 minutes. This is going to be an extended version, as it deserves.
This is an EP.
This is an EP. Yeah, season 2 finale, my friends. I hope you are enjoying this interaction. But Brad, continue to riff.
So binary stars, the 2 little stars are orbiting around each other. Boulder and Denver are binary stars.
Sure.
Toronto and Waterloo are binary stars. And there's a whole bunch of examples of this that you see. And one of the things I try to encourage people is don't play a zero-sum game with startup communities. It's not Boulder wins and Denver loses, or Denver wins and Boulder loses. It's self-reinforcing in a positive way. You build a positive feedback loop that benefits both. And so it's a positive-sum game, or, in more formalized language, a non-zero-sum game. And one of the things that's been so satisfying to me about thinking about startup communities or seeing the evolution of startup communities in geography is, generally speaking, people understanding pretty quickly that they're not in competition with the next city over. Not always. And there's definitely plenty of regional competition that occurs, but the collaboration is way more powerful. The other thing that sort of evolves from this, and you talk about the situation where there's too many feeders and not enough founders, and people want stuff to happen, but they can't get the founders engaged. Or maybe there are enough founders and the founders just don't care about the feeders. They just don't feel like engaging because they got businesses to run and shit. My suggestion in those situations for the instigators, not for the feeder organizations, but for the people in those feeder organizations that essentially want to, I'm really excited about startup communities and founders and entrepreneurship. And yeah, I work for city government or I work for a big company or whatever, but this stuff's really exciting to me. Some of those people, by the way, in the feeder organizations, their job will be to do some of that local economic development or whatever. But even if it's not, and it's just interesting to you, I encourage some version of going rogue, all right, or going native. Like, you still work for and are a card-carrying employee of and need to subscribe to the norms and behaviors of the organization you're a part of. But the startup community is not a formalized organization. It's no different than a pickup basketball game. And if you go play a pickup basketball game, your company is not going to say you can't play a pickup basketball game as long as you're not playing it, at between 2 and 3 when you have a meeting that you have to be at. So figure out how to go play pickup basketball games with founders. And go find the founders because they're there. Because even if you have a relatively small place, there are founders. And approach it from the standpoint of, again, the language of startup communities. If the goal of the startup community is to help founders be successful, you're not going to the founders and trying to sell them something or co-opt something or push something on them or convince them to be part of a thing. You're finding them and you're trying to figure out how to help them be successful using the resources you have available to you, which, depending on who you work for and what you're involved in and what you care about, vary widely. But in 2025, it's not actually that hard to do a little research, figure out what you can do to be helpful to somebody, and then do that proactively versus show up and say, okay, hi, here I am. What can I do to help? And that's another essential part. I'll be a good book salesman. It's another essential part of GiveFirst, which is it's not about saying to somebody, what can I do to help? It's about proactively helping. It's about approaching things from the standpoint of my orientation in this engagement is to put energy into the system and to try to figure out how to do something that's additive, not rely on somebody else to tell me what it is. Mm-hmm. And in those communities that you're describing, a couple of instigators, you're an instigator and you're at the university and you know an instigator who works for city government and you know another instigator who works for a big company. Instead of being representatives of your company, the three of you get together, go out to dinner and say, God, we're just stifling this thing. Nothing's happening. How do we turn this on its side? How do we take this snow globe and shake it a little bit and have fun with it? Like, don't let it be yet another set of tasks. And again, do a little bit of work on the front end. The cliche, the best way to get a busy person's attention is to engage with something that they care about. If you're trying to get a busy person's attention by jumping up and down saying, pay attention to me, pay attention to me, pay attention to me, that's not a good way to do it. If you're trying to get their attention by saying, Brad Feld's a jackass, I don't like this guy, what a fucker, I'm just going to ignore.
That's how I got you in the podcast.
Yeah, that's right. I'm just going to ignore you. Like, I don't, that's not going to get my attention.
Sure.
Unless unless I'm so narcissistic and so thin-skinned that I can't do anything but react to you, which I'm not, I hope. But when somebody shows up and actually engages with something I'm interested in, I'm interested in them all of a sudden.
Nice. Down the path a ways, after you've shaken it on the side, the energy is high, everything's awesome, right? Because the allure of new is easy to like. The J-curve was an interesting section in the startup community way, knowing that you can feel a sense of almost stagnation when it's not the cool thing in town anymore. It's just the reality of that environment. And I remember asking Ian, I forget what the setting was, how do you get out of a J-curve? And I was looking for this silver bullet, but he was just like, you just got to keep doing more of everything.
Yeah. That's
come on.
Totally the right answer. And then, J-curve also is language that applies to investing because a lot of venture capital funds, sort of a classic part of it is that your things that are going to fail early. And so as you're investing, you have your losers, ripen early. So
sure, that makes sense.
You all of a sudden have things that you put money in that go to zero. And oftentimes in the first, 3 or 4 years of a venture fund's life, its returns are negative. You also have management fees, which drag down, your returns life. So that's where the J-curve language comes from, which is the idea that if you start it on the x-axis, t equals 0, and the y-axis is your return, it actually makes a J, sort of a backwards J, right?
What's the average length in venture capital world where the J-curve is back to good?
Well, it varies. Like historically, the J-curve was usually a 2 to 4 years of being in negative territory.
I think 7 years pops in my mind.
No, there was a cliche for a long time that venture funds and VCs invested in companies with the idea that they'd exit in 5 to 7 years, and that's long gone. Like, the longest board I ever sat on was a company called Return Path. I was on that board for 21 years.
Wow.
Right. So the idea that companies ripen in 5 to 7 years, they do fail. A lot of companies fail in year 1 or year 2 or year 3. And there was a difference though in the in the time period, and this also happened by the way in the internet bubble, in the time period of zero interest rates where there was this like rapid acceleration of value creation and very fast. By the time you got to about 2016, 17, 18, you were starting to have a seed investment, and then very rapidly after that, another round at a step up, and very quickly after that, a round at a step up. The J-curve kind of disappeared. So a lot of funds, really negative, never went into negative territory. That's back, for plenty of funds, and it's normal, right? This idea that you're, if you're not bullshitting yourself, almost by definition, unless you're investing the capital incredibly fast, like a very short period of time, which also happened, like where fund life was like 1 year. If you're investing your capital over 2 or 3 or 4 years, by year 3, you're still putting money into new companies at 1 times your money. And so you're not getting this uplift. And so it sort of flattens your returns. Your returns start to show up in a venture fund typically, year 7, year 8, year 9 is when they really start to ripen. And just as an aside, I mean, there was when I started doing venture in the mid-90s, the only thing anybody cared about on the investor side, and the only metrics that people actually paid attention to was something that is easily labeled cash-on-cash return. You're the investor, you give me $1, I give you back more than $1. And that's all you care about over time. And sort of the time frames were sort of long, and the amount of dollars I gave you back, you kind of hoped I'd give you back $3 or $4. And those did equate to an IRR metric, but the really fundamental thing was cash-on-cash return. Interestingly, as venture got bigger and more asset managers got involved in the venture category, and performance started to become rapid returns of capital or big private markups. So the company's private, but you haven't returned the capital yet. You gave me $1. I'm sort of telling you, well, that $1 is worth...
It's worth $4, but you can't have
it. It's worth $4, but I haven't given you any back yet. But trust me, it's worth $4 someday. IRR became the number that everybody focused on. And there's 2 types of there's multiple IRRs, but one is a cash IRR, which is actually cash in, cash out. But then there was unrealized IRR, which was the calculation of this, sort of fake numbers. And of course, the best number that most people would put forward would be actually cash or unrealized IRR combined with a gross IRR, because one of the things in venture is that if you get above return of capital, the VC gets 20%, or in some funds, 25 or 30% of it. But you report your IRR on a gross basis as though that was all the money. So over time, I think people started to report more numbers so that it wasn't as much obfuscation. But with the complete lack of liquidity in general over the last couple of years, right, since fall or winter of 2021, there's been very little liquidity, very little M&A, very little IPOs. There's been some, but very little. All of a sudden, everybody's focused on something called DPI, which is distributed to paid in capital, which, by the way, is cash-on-cash return.
All the acronyms make me think of the measurement trap. And I know that's not what we're talking about, right?
But it's
the measurement is something
it's the same thing. It's
you start throwing these things around, and they can become misguided, like almost a safety net of success.
I think it's a management fallacy, or maybe it's a thing that's been promulgated on business, not just tech, but business, that is really there's elements of it that are really useful, and there's elements that are really distorting, and some that are probably just plain outright destructive or misleading. And the measurement trap comes from Startup Community Way, and it was a result of Ian and I talking about something that came up every time there was a conversation about startup communities with feeders who were economic actors. So governments, big companies, less so with universities, but sometimes nonprofit organizations that were funding things to help with economic development, or the entrepreneurial ecosystem or the startup community. And they would always say, well, we need to have reporting measures to go back to justify that we're doing this. And the reporting measures in a lot of cases were actually not useful measures, right? Number of jobs created. Well, if you're doing raw startups...
the ultimate gold mine for government.
Right. Okay, so let's see. On year 1, we're going to add 3 people. And then on year 2, we're going to be up to 10 people. But if we're successful by year 10, maybe we'll be a couple of thousand people and we'll have generated some real wealth. And the government person who's going to get a new job in 2 years is like, well, that doesn't help me because I'm thinking about my new job in 2 years. Or the administration that's going to change in whatever, right? So, and there's a long list of these kinds of problems. And what we were just talking, the bullshit we're talking about with venture capital metrics, I heard this first when I was young in the venture business in the 90s from Jack Tankersley, who was one of my mentors in VC. He was one of the two essentially founders of the venture capital community in Colorado with Steve Halstead. They were partners at a firm called Centennial Fund that had a long and very successful history. And I was just with Jack one day, and we were having dinner or lunch or something, or maybe I think we may have been in a board meeting, and it was talking about something to do with valuation of the company and valuation metrics. And Jack sort of got this sort of southern drawl, like kind of no bullshit, whatever. It's like, oh, that's just venture gymnastics. Like, none of that matters. That's just, you get.
Yeah, I can hear him. I can hear him say it just like this.
And I kind of remember sitting there thinking, yeah, like, so, think about it as a business person, the number of times you've heard some version of the phrase, measure what matters, or what matters is what you measure. And there's, again, a lot of value in that in different ways, but there's a bunch of that that's actually not that useful. And I'll give sort of a broader example, but it's all back to the same measurement trap construct. Probably some people listening know what KPIs and OKRs are. They're popularized by Google. I think they were probably highly impactful on Google for some period of time. They've been highly impactful on some companies in terms of how those companies are structured and managed. The number of times I have seen KPIs used in stupid ways that derail companies, that don't focus on what actually is important for the growth and the health of the company, that that end up being massive walls of data to justify behavior or justify compensation that really has little to nothing to do with the actual health and success of the company is far outweighs the number of times that they've been useful. And that's just KPIs and OKRs. Like, the amount of getting lost in stuff that doesn't matter versus actually understanding the root cause of the problem. This isn't working. I don't know why. What's the root cause? And figuring out how to get to that root cause is really, really hard. And I have learned over many, many experiences that the best way to get to the root cause is partly Socratic. So it's asking questions.
Well, and in GiveFirst, you're talking about the 5 whys as well.
But that's where it goes. It's not just asking questions to try to get to root cause. It's continuing to ask why with each answer. Because usually when you ask somebody a question, they give you an answer when you're trying to deal with and unscramble a problem. The first answer they give you is rarely the root cause. And so I remember when we did diagram sentences in elementary school or junior high or whatever.
Sure.
It's sort of the same thing. You have to look at the response. Why are we having why is this thing not working? And the person says it's not working because of blah. And you have to sort of look at that sentence or whatever the words are and figure out what the next question is. Well, could be, why is blah important? Right? And if the person says, well, that's an interesting starting point. Like maybe blah isn't the reason it's not working.
Sure.
Or if they say, well, blah is important because blah causes X to connect to Y, which then causes Z to happen. And
why is Z important?
Well, you could say why is Z important. You can say why is it important that X connect to Y?
Sure.
Right. So, like again, we're making it abstract, but using like the tangible things to keep asking with why as the starting point, and back to listening, having to listen carefully to it. And I found that to be a diagnostic that where data helps with that, and measuring things help with that. But if you don't run that process when you have a problem to try to get to the root cause, you generally create solutions that don't address the root cause of the problem.
Sure.
And so then your solutions are actually not solving the problem.
Well, my friends, I'm feeling very energized, Brad. Thank you for being here, my friend.
Energized is better than tired, Ben. You say, I've just been talking to you for an hour and I'm tired.
No way. I could do this, and we'll do this longer. In fact, if you're cool, maybe take a little break, sip on some beverages here, and jam a little bit more. We've really leaned into entrepreneurship, the entrepreneurial lifestyle, entrepreneurial ecosystems, startup communities, and the even leadership, I would say, at a broader level. Would you be interested in jamming a little bit on the tech nerdy side of things, and maybe finish with a little life and happiness?
I'll talk about whatever you want. And remember, my stories are all too long, so I'll just keep going. I got nowhere else to be but sitting here with you right now.
Well, let's take a little break, refill our mugs, and we'll be right back. But we've got the cliffhanger. This is a thing we've done in all these different episodes. Lingering questions that you might be able to come back after the break and answer. One is I'm curious how the founders of Techstars, drinking brews and talking about the years that have gone by and how Accelerator, the term, has evolved and the impact that's been made. That has to be kind of a fun interaction and reflective moment. I'm also kind of curious about you personally, with the amount of books that you've shared, the blogging, all the impact that you've made. What's the strongest sensation that comes to mind when you think about the impact that you've made through the ideas that you've shared? We'll be right back. And welcome to a short break within an epically extended episode with Brad Feld. I teleported back into my studio to rewind the clock and narrate GiveFirst, which is a section brewed into You Don't Need This Book, inspired by the term and the hashtag that we've been talking about throughout this episode, and it's the title of Brad Feld's new book. So it really felt fun to rewind back to 2020 and take a peek at how I translated this positive sum, generous mentality. All right, let's dive in. Hashtag GiveFirst. The energy of accelerating others is unmatched. When talking with others, forget potential transactions. Instead, start by focusing on how you can help proactively. People gravitate toward those who choose genuine selflessness over their own interests. Showing you care can be as easy as a quick thought to help someone else take their next step. Perhaps there's a helpful introduction you can make. It can even be as simple as showing you care enough to listen. Extra shot. Early in my career, I was told that everything felt like a one-way street with me. From then on, I made an effort to actively listen first and talk less. This is difficult when you might know the answer, or all you want to do is to invite someone to your next gathering, even sell whatever it may be. Be willing to show up, stand out, and follow up to seal the deal, but pave two-way streets that allow your relationships to flourish by pulling as much as you push. All right, back in. However you choose to contribute, the trick is not expecting anything specific in return. This benevolent attitude has been encapsulated in the hashtag GiveFirst. Now, in the bonus materials of this episode, you'll find all sorts of related materials, including more podcasts and the book itself. But back into the writing, maintaining a give-first mentality will spawn meaningful discussions faster and more often. This happens because without ulterior motives, you're able to explore anything without remorse. Over time, this allows more meaningful connections to evolve versus contacts without context. When you play the long game of investing in the success of others, the real fun begins. Concerned you'll never achieve your goals if you're always trying to help others? Don't be. If you're relentlessly giving first, you will earn the attention of people eager to return the favor. You'll also get asked about your own work more often. That's when you spark intrigue by saying it's a secret before shifting the discussion back to them. They'll laugh, love it, and come back for more. Speaking of more, I thought I would keep this thing flowing by reading another writing from the Roasted Reflections collection. This has got some emotions woven through, and the title is Intrinsic. We all have bad days. When they string together, the stress can get heavy. This mental weight becomes especially unwieldy when the cause is unclear. If down days stack up, searching for the origin can lead to liberating awareness. This is not a simple pursuit. Emotions are transient, external factors remain in constant flux, and the labyrinth of life is winding. Support is available, but resources specific to the entrepreneurial lifestyle can be tricky. To start, destigmatize the circuitry between leadership and mental health. Be content knowing it's not always rainbows and unicorns. This is a lonely roller coaster, my friends, with highs and lows at every turn. Recognizing this helps us appreciate the extent and impermanence of emotions. Leaders thrive on being exposed to new things, interesting problems, stories from different people, and building into whatever we care about. When there's a lull in that action, it's easy to think the ride is over. While this thought may be misguided, it's disheartening and can lead to an isolating absence of joy. Identifying intrinsic motivations help leaders navigate and go beyond temporary despair. As the highs of a milestone moment start to fade, be honest with your situation and don't shy away from what got you here. Intrinsic motivators like the love for family, fun with friends, helping others, thinking big, physical activity, and perpetual learning guides us back to peace and happiness. Along with internal observations, lean on those who understand the realities of an entrepreneurial lifestyle. Welcome sincere conversations and listen actively to have others wanting to help you in return. Here are a few more effective ways leaders can maintain their mental fitness. Try something new. Reconnect with nature. Travel to expand the mind. Link teaching with learning. Create more than you consume. Stay centered with physical and mental exercise. Avoid routine and don't be afraid to ask for help. Strength does not come from ignoring pain. Within the crucible of an entrepreneurial lifestyle, hardship is inevitable, but storms will pass, and self-inquiry keeps leaders aware of their own fortitude. This reveals more stepping stones that illuminate fresh motivation to help leaders transcend momentary setbacks. Oh, I hope that hit you right where you needed it. Let's get back to this episode. Cheers to EP100 and the Season 2 finale. All right, Brad, what else do you got for us? And welcome back to this special extended experience with Brad Feld in studio, Boulder, Colorado. Yo, Coop Studios, thank you for hosting a beautiful environment to have a very special conversation. As you enjoyed, the first part was really all about entrepreneurship and startup communities and leadership. And let's, as discussed before the break, shift gears. Let's get a little nerder with some technology and lean into the life and happiness factor. But before we broke, I asked about how the Techstars co-founders kind of talk about Techstars, and then also that sensation that you personally have felt after delivering so much art into the world.
Well, there's 4 Techstars co-founders, David Cohen and David Brown, who had a long business relationship prior to starting Techstars. They created a couple of companies. One of them, the one that was most successful, was Pinpoint, which ended up being a pretty significant company that was a pioneer in the EMS space. and medical services, emergency medical services, software, and a bunch of things for ambulances and stuff like that. So they had this long working relationship. I met David on Random Day, so that's how our relationship developed. And obviously I met David Brown through David Cohen. And then the fourth co-founder is Jared Polis, who now is governor of Colorado, but was and is a very close friend of mine from my early days in Boulder. He was one of the first people I met when I moved here. He was an entrepreneur who had, at the time, he was running a company that turned into BlueMountainArts.com. His family owned the greeting card company, and he and his dad created the .com. He also subsequently created, that company got bought by Excite for, I don't know, $600 or $700 million.
Excite, I remember Excite.
So Excite, a linkage of Excite is I
had an email through Excite.
Did you?
Yep.
Did you? All right. Well, one of my partners at Foundry, Ryan McIntyre, was one of the co-founders of Excite.
Wow. And
I'll see him tomorrow night, and I'll say, hey, I ran into a guy who had an Excite email. And Ryan likes to say that the acquisition of BlueMountainArts.com was the beginning of the end of Excite, because they spent like half in stock and half in cash, and they ended up going bankrupt. And Ryan said, man, we really needed that cash. Jared, that was Jared's second company. He'd started a company when he was in college. That was an internet hosting company that he sold, I think, to Exodus. And then he started another company called Pro Flowers that turned into Provide Commerce and went public and then got bought by Liberty Media. He'd also done a bunch of other companies, including one called Stardot that was a political consulting company. And I think his investor was Art Laffer of the Laffer Curve fame. Yeah, because San Diego and Art Laffer lived in San Diego. And I had invested in a company as an angel investor called Net Capital with an O that was making web pages for people in Congress. And we merged those two companies together. And it was a tiny little company that made web pages for members of Congress and did some, I don't know what else we did.
That's quite a collection of co-founders.
Okay. And we then sold that company, and it really was not going anywhere meaningful because it was a little too early. And we then sold, because you can imagine a time when everybody in government didn't have a website. They didn't even have an email address. They had no idea what any of this stuff was. Yeah. And it was a pretty evangelical sell at that point. This is probably 1996. We sold that company to some small public company whose stock then like quadrupled. And it ended up being a decent investment. And I think over time that company's, probably failed or something like that. So it was kind of this weird starting point for me and Jared. Fun. Like when I say weird, not weird bad. Weird.
No, I think of weird as good.
As good. And so we've been good friends since. So those were the four co-founders. And interestingly, Jared was very, very involved the first couple of years, and then he ran for Congress and got a congressional seat in the House for Colorado. And at that point, he had to stop doing stuff like that.
That makes sense.
Which is, logical from conflict rules. So he continued to come to like demo days, and we'd celebrate him as a co-founder, but he was not actively involved from that point forward, but close friend. Eventually, David Cohen ran the company at the beginning. Eventually, David Brown joined. I can't remember the year, 2012. So like in year 4, year 5, because he had been working for the company that bought their prior company. He came over, and the company was probably about 30 or 40 people. And Brown and Cohen really worked as co-CEOs for a long time. And the titles moved around, but they were really co-CEO. Even from the very beginning, they worked out of the same office. Their desk was next to each other.
Nice.
And they had this long working relationship of knowing how to do that together. And I eventually, my office at Foundry was on the same floor and across the hall from their office.
I remember visiting, yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
So we were in a building, 1050 Walnut Street in downtown Boulder.
One of the early tall buildings here in Boulder.
That's right. And Techstars was on one side, and we were on the other side. And so, I saw him in the bathroom every day. When we were all in town, but we there was a lot of hanging out in a work context.
Sure.
But and then a lot of functional work, but a lot of on the road together. Especially me and Cohen, because we would do things like the the Do More Faster book tour, or when I travel to a demo day somewhere, David and I would often travel together. the friendships that developed, it's sort of interesting to think about them. The four of us are, we're good, we're friendly. Like the baseline is that it's a really good friendly relationship. And we've had our ups and downs in terms of all the dynamics, but it's that. The friendships, I would say, for example, Brown and I have a work friendship, right? It's a very good work friendship. We've had our tension over the years and had to work through things and learn how to be more effective with each other. But it's a strong work friendship. Cohen and I have an incredibly close personal friendship and work friendship.
I would think that the travel probably created those layers.
Yeah, I think some of it's also personality. I have immense affection for him. I've learned a ton from him. We've done a lot of things together that were personal in a business context. Our social time, like going on long, holiday trips, we've done 1 or 2 vacations together, with our spouses. With his wife is named Jill, my wife is named Amy, with Amy and Jill. But it's not like a lot, right? And then I would say Jared and I have I feel very emotionally connected to him. I have a great amount of affection for him. But our work dynamic has mostly been me supporting him in things when he's called me as, in Congress or, now as governor, and saying, can you help with this thing or that thing? Which my goal with government is not to call government and say, can you help me with this? It's the opposite. It's to be on the receiving end of it. So back to your question, by the way, people haven't put this on 1.5x yet. You probably figured out you should probably just put this on 1.5x.
Or we could just start talking faster.
Yeah, we could do that. Sort of the four of us don't get together. It's not a hangout as the four of us. It's more 2 people hanging out, or maybe 3 of us hanging out, or the 4 of us together at some event that is a Techstars related event. But again, which is
a lot different than, having coffee together, sitting somewhere and really like reflecting. Well, I would encourage you to do that sometime soon.
We probably will. Techstars has it's 18 years old, right?
Yeah.
And David, who is now back in the CEO seat and has been for a year, and is doing an awesome job with the next 10 years of what Techstars is going to be. We had our awkward teenage years. I mean, we definitely had a bunch of stuff that we did, made mistakes. There were strategic friction over strategic direction. I would say that if I reflect on, like going back 5 or 6 years, we got into a cycle that we now say very clearly. We have 3 recommitments, or David has 3 recommitments that I think that people inside the company are sick of hearing. But one of them is better is better. And it really came from the view or the dynamic where I think we were on this more companies, more places, more investments, bigger, rather than focusing on better, where better also included that what we were doing with the companies to help the companies be successful. And the 3 recommitments are: 1, Techstars exists solely to help founders succeed. That's it. We don't have customers other than the founder. The only customer is a founder. Everything else is a partner. It's a little bit of the recasting of the leader, founder, and feeder, everything else. So it's not that Techstars doesn't have corporate partners and doesn't have partnerships with universities and doesn't have sponsors for things and different kinds of things. But the essence of what we're focused on is helping founders succeed. The second is a thing that was real internal, I would say, struggle post-COVID, which was, I have always believed that Techstars is at its best when it's helping democratize entrepreneurship globally. That does not mean run accelerators all over the world. That means do things in cities all over the world that connect people to Techstars network, that Techstars supports, that are around founders and founders trying to get companies started. And examples of long arc programming that we've done would include Startup Weekend, Startup Week, I mean, people talk about those things, but those are things that Techstars has now been doing for a very long time.
Embracing startup communities, right? And you even see the fresh programming, startup community partnerships.
Yeah, so that would be an example of it, which is David and I were sitting around talking about it and said, what came out of the conversation around embracing startup communities, which is the second of those recommitments, was, geez, we know so many startup communities that have the same problem that startups have. And what's the magic of a Techstars mentor-driven accelerator? It's a relatively small number of companies, 10-ish, could be less, could be more, plus or minus one or two, who have an intense 90-day, in-person, connected experience where, in addition to being surrounded by mentors, not gurus, not people saying you should do this, you should do that, but mentors who are not just giving a talk or hosting a dinner, but working closely with those founders, not every day, day in and day out. It might be a once a week kind of deep engagement, but with one set of companies or two sets of companies where that mentor is really an extended part of the team. And then sort of in this 90-day period, you develop these relationships with the other founders and the other participants in the accelerator that are, for life type of relationships. And you learn as much from them and what they're going through as they do from you. The experiences are shared. And it's not just a connected network, we both had the same experience. It's an emotional and functional bond that's really powerful. And what came from that with the idea of startup community partnerships is, why not do that with startup communities, run cohorts, somewhere between 5 and 10 communities at a time, surround them with mentors who are startup community leaders and champions from all over the world in different geographies, have some structured content. This is not in person, although some of it would be in person. And the idea is have a long arc of it. So the startup community partnerships, instead of a 90-day thing, are 4-year programs.
Well, to your point, the long-term lens is required.
It takes a long time. Like, you can't start up a startup community in 90 days. And our view was there's a lot of startup communities in the world now because that concept exists. It's not a new idea. And again, I believe it. Again, and we talked about it earlier. Any city with 50,000 people should do it. And if you're a city that has less than 50,000 people, gang up with the neighbors of yours. And where your goal is to help founders be successful, why not take all of those cities or help all of those cities that have gotten started but haven't really broken out of what's going on, or don't have critical mass, or are struggling with the balance between, like, how do we do this? Or, to your point, have an oversupply of feeders in the organizations that want to help, but don't have enough leaders who know what to do and how to navigate through that sort of stuff. And so we're using the same mentorship-driven approach with startup communities to try to help get startup communities to the next level, but also connect them as part of the Techstars network. So one of the challenges, and this comes back to, like, how do we think about it in year 18? One of the challenges that we have as we expanded geographically was everyone, the first conversation would be, let's do an accelerator in our city. And, that's cool, but there's a couple of things that are important to recognize. One, you need capital for that. So that capital has to come from somewhere. Number two, you have to have a critical mass of mentors in your city that are willing to engage. So you have to have some energy around that already. Number three, you have to have things that are going to either engage founders who are in your city or attract founders to your city. That the goal is not to have the founders come to your city and leave. It's to have the founders come to your city and continue and to engage with your city over a long period of time. So there's a bunch of stuff where there'd be a lot of places that would say, we want to do an accelerator here. And the challenge for us was, the answer to that was, let's find a corporate partner that'll come up with money to sponsor, or to fund part of it, But what ended up happening was a bunch of those accelerators were not long-term persistent. They would run for 2 or 3 years. The corporate partner would kind of say, well, that was fun. And, and it was a useful thing, but it didn't create sort of the network effect we were looking for. And there were kind of two ways, probably more than two ways to deal with that. one way to deal with it, I think, is the way we're dealing with it now, which is to say, the goal is not to sell accelerators into cities all over the world. It's to figure out how to engage startup communities with the Techstars network and make those long-term persistent engagement, and then let it evolve from there, where some of them will get to a place where it makes sense to put accelerators in those cities. Some of them might have accelerators already without Techstars. Like, let's be complementary to that rather than try to compete with that dynamic. And let's try to do it in a way where we are helpful to the geography and the founders at the moment of time and the place the geography is. The other strategy, which was the strategy that Techstars was going down, which was, you know what, let's consolidate the number of geographies that we have accelerators in. Let's concentrate on a couple of regions. Let's do bigger programs. So instead of 10-person programs, let's do much larger ones so that we have enough critical mass around it from sort of the cost structure of doing it. And, I'm on the board. I'm complicit in all of that stuff. So it's not me saying, I didn't want to do that because I was a participant in that. But for me, a lot of those strategy decisions and discussions, which played out over a long period of time, also were being dealt with in what was now a downturn, right? Sort of post the top of the ZERP era. So the startup activity, the funding, it wasn't that the startup activity and demand was going away, but the funding dynamics were shifting. I struggled with a lot of that stuff. So, we now label it awkward teenage years. I mean, everybody that's been a teenager, which probably is everybody that's listening to this, remembers kind of like you tried to do some stuff that just wasn't you and didn't feel right. And, whether you're trying to like impress somebody or be part of a team or get a new friend group or whatever, or you're just pissed off at your parents and you didn't know how to talk to them about it, or maybe hormones just overwhelmed you, or all of those things. and so we had a couple of years of that. And I think it's really nice. David Cohen and David Brown, David Cohen, again, CEO, David Brown's on the board. And like, as we're working with the rest of the Techstars board, which are board members who are outside board members that we brought in different ways, it's really felt good the last, 6-9 months. It took David three months to kind of get his footing. He had been chairman, so he was involved in everything that was going on, but he wasn't running it again. And so I think your comment is a good one. I'm going to actually be proactive about it and have dinner with at least David and David. And I bet I can get Jared to come to dinner because he's in and around. I think we're going to go to dinner at Barchetta, which is Tim Miller's restaurant.
Oh, snap. Now we're manifesting it.
Yeah, Tim is a longtime good friend. He co-founded Rally Software with Ryan Martins. He's also been, a great mentor. Both of them been great mentors. Rally was one of the early 20-teens Boulder public companies. So there were 3 that went public kind of in a time period. Rally, SendGrid, which was a Techstars company, and Zayo, which was Dan Caruso's company. It is now one of the largest fiber companies in the world. So we'll go to Barchetta, which is across the street from Jared's condo and down the block from my condo.
Afties.
So there's no good argument for, oh gosh, like the logistics of that's going to be a pain in the ass. So Ben, thank you. That's going to happen before Amy and I go to Aspen in the middle of June.
All right. Well, that will be an interesting dinner. And the third one, in case you were curious, is the bigger doesn't equal better. And you said better is better.
Better is better. We should finish with that. And better is better really easy. One of the longtime Techstars supporters. He's an investor in the overall Techstars company. He's a longtime friend of mine, a very successful entrepreneur, a guy named Walt Winchell. Walt was an entrepreneur. He's probably 15 years older than me. He's somewhere in his 70s now. He was an entrepreneur in Boston, had a very successful company. I met him through a company called Harmonix that I was an angel investor in.
Yeah, Guitar Hero.
You got it, Guitar Hero and rock band. And Walt...
You might not know this. That game was critical for our one of my earlier quests. We built a social network back when MySpace was cool.
Ah.
And the live video game event management became this thing that we were able to execute on. And so Guitar Hero was very popular in corporate realms. So we would come and deliver the gameplay for the company, and they would use that as the magnet at a conference and do their thing.
That's awesome.
And so we played guitar. I played Guitar Hero in Times Square.
Awesome. Well,
but going back to
the company behind it, Harmonix, Alex Rogopoulos and Aran Agozi, or the co-founders. Aran lived in is in the same fraternity that I lived in, which is now co-ed, so we call it a society today. But at the time, I didn't know him. He was younger than me, and he just had heard my name. And this is another random day thing, right? He had heard my name. I don't remember the time frame, 1994-ish. He sent me an email. He said, I'm starting a company with a friend of mine. I'm in your fraternity. I'd love to get together. And I said, great. And we got together. And they had raised a little bit of friend of family money, not very much. And I ended up essentially putting together and leading an angel round that was $500,000 in total, which at the time was a pretty good size angel round. Harmonix then proceeded to try to go out of business every year for the next 10 years and didn't manage to. Every year they somehow figured out how to get enough money. They never raised very much money, how to make enough money from a game or something to stay in business. And then 10 years later, they came out with Guitar Hero, and the worldwide inventory of Guitar Hero sold out in 24 hours.
Wow.
And they had their hit.
Yeah.
Viacom bought the company. They then came out with Rock Band, and Rock Band also became this mega hit. And then Viacom decided they didn't want a video game company anymore. It was MTV owned it, and so, which was a subsidiary of Viacom. So the founders bought it back for $59.95, which was the cost of a video game, and assumption of some debt, and Viacom got a big tax write-off. And then Foundry reinvested in Harmonix.
Really?
And they started doing VR gaming, and Epic ended up buying, Epic, the game company that was Fortnite, ended up buying it. So I've had a 20-something year journey with those guys.
Yeah.
And I'll send this to Alex and Aran and say, deep in it, you got to hang in there to hear about it. What led us down this path is I met Walt through that, because Walt was one of the larger investors. He invested a couple of $1 million. He joined the board, and he really helped them architect the sale to MTV. And that sale was brilliant because they had, it was a good sized deal, like $175 million up front or something like that. But it had an earnout. And the earnout, which most earnouts don't ever pay out, right? Most earnouts don't work. This particular earnout was an earnout that was uncapped, and it was based on a multiple of revenue in excess of something. And I won't go through the whole story. If you're interested in it, Wikipedia has the whole story.
Okay, nice.
And in the end, Viacom was very unhappy with the magnitude of the earnout. Their game plan and sort of their playbook is don't pay it and sue or fight. There was a lot of lawsuits that followed. And about 7 years after the sale, and it was after the founders had bought the company back, the lawsuit was adjudicated, and I think we got another $500 million. And it was insane, right? And
how much financial capital do you feel like you've deployed into the universe?
I don't know, but I want to label Walt for this one. Walt was what's called a shareholder rep. So he was the one that was leading all of this, and his tenacity and the amount of energy he put into this was remarkable. And he's done the same as a supporter of Techstars. As an investor, he's probably invested in 150 Techstars companies.
Awesome.
He's been just fantastic in terms of, helping and giving feedback. And if you know Walt, he's sharp. His feedback is sharp. It's not like velvet glove type of stuff. Like you feel it, but it's really helpful. And one of the things I think that's so wonderful from my perspective about this moment is I think Walt's been saying for at least 10 years to me, Brad, bigger isn't better. Better is better. This bullshit with more, it's not more, it's better. And to have that really be embraced at the core it makes me feel good.
That's cool, man. I was doing a little research in Foundry's different funds, and I just it was like $1.7 billion. Thank you. I want to say...
No, our funds are bigger than that. So we've raised total we've got AUM right now of a little bit over $3 billion.
Wow. I want to
welcome.
say thank you
You're welcome.
on behalf of so many different like entrepreneurs that you've helped accelerated with that capital. That's pretty unique and phenomenal. And it might be a good segue into like how you personally feel that we're still on the cliffhanger, Brad.
I don't know. See, 20% too long. Maybe people should move this up to 2x and go a little faster.
But real, like in one word, how about that challenge? One word, what's the sensation you feel knowing your ideas have been shared so globally?
Content.
Nice. That would rhyme with how I felt after my book came out. Peace.
Yeah.
Would be mine.
Yeah. I don't believe in legacy. Amy and I don't have any kids. We publicly said a while ago that, and there was a Denver Post article that was, I don't even remember what the source of the article was, but I basically was quoted as saying, when I die, I hope I've, mostly given away all my money. Like, I live a really good life. I'm very comfortable. I'm not going to die, it's not, I want to die penniless. It's not that line. It's, this is the experience. Like, this is now. I don't believe there's something that happens after lights go out. I think you're done. I think your time on this planet is now. And I'm totally fine with whatever anybody's belief systems are, right? So I have no issues with different belief systems. This is mine. I don't need to impose it on you. And in the context of that, like, nobody's going to give a shit about me after I'm dead. None of that stuff matters. So what matters is what happens now, what I do now. And I have, I know a pretty deeply defined and well-codified internal value system. It evolves, I learn, I change, I have experiences, I have successes, I have failures. I observe things that cause me profound disappointment and incredible joy. Mm-hmm. But, like that I like to talk about them as cultural norms. My norms evolve, but they're pretty well defined. And I'm about to turn 60, so they're defined and they're starting to get sclerotic.
Sclerotic. There's a vocabulary term.
And so for me, like, content is what it is. Like, I'm also always have been very intrinsically motivated versus extrinsically motivated. I like. Everybody has an ego, including me. So sure, when you say thank you or somebody says something nice, I got a Lifetime Achievement Award at 40.
There you go. Well, now what do you do? You're done
so
here.
Fucked up. Like, I'm 40. Like, don't give me a Lifetime Achievement Award at 40. And so in accepting it, I said, I'm going to retitle this. It's not a Lifetime Achievement Award because I'm only 40. It's a Half-Life Achievement Award.
There you go.
And then, like, about 30 seconds later after something, I'm like, shit. I said, no, Half-Life Achievement Award's not good because half-life in physics means that you get a little bit worse every day. And I don't want that. Like,
aging does have a physical factor.
It does, but you get the message. The point is, like, this is the experience. And I think for me, and Amy has really helped me understand this, both about me and about existence on this planet. I want to feel content with what I've done. And as you think about that, my guess is that you're not interested in digitized consciousness based off your thoughts around legacy. No, I'm going to be done with humans by the time I get to some age. Now, if I'm 470 years old and my digital consciousness still persists and somebody plays it back to it, just ignore me because I changed my mind. If the AIs actually have control over this and I change my mind, this is not Brad.
This is not Brad.
This is Ben. Ben said that. Brad didn't say that.
I have enjoyed having Ben Bot, which has, influence layers with all my writings. And usually it's in studio with us. And so I'll prompt it and have it add some fun nerdery. I even got a voice for it here in season 2. So Ben Bot's been a fun counterpart. But it was just kind of a way to tinker, if you will, kind of like the NFT collection, like exploring some of these technology frontiers. And as you perpetually learn, being around folks who are going deep in all these different ways, I've always been a good like translator of nerd to normal. And so when I find something that I can actually execute on and it catches my attention enough to build again, I'm thankful for community because it invites those types of collisions that create awareness. that I can, execute on in various ways. And so the digitized consciousness thing is something that I'm compelled to ask you about. But then also like the quantified self. I know it's not as deep future anymore, but with your conversations around Fitbit and getting involved with like understanding yourself. What's a technology flavored thought that you don't think will age?
Well, so the digital consciousness is interesting because that's been a sci-fi trope for my whole life.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a lot of stuff happening right now that is not digitized consciousness, but is a simulation of digitized consciousness, right? Which is like, take a step back. You think about like, the thing we call AI today, and there's endless arguments about it. So I'm going to be very pedantic about it.
Pedantic? Yeah. Another good one.
There you go. AI today is basically predict the next word or predict the next pixel. And, it's pretty amazing what predict the next word and predict the next pixel has turned into. And there's a lot of obfuscation about, what thinking is in the context of all of this stuff. But one of the things that's really been interesting to me is to see how effective. I wrote professional software till 1992, and then I didn't. And, because I became too busy, and then I became an investor, and, other people wrote software. So I stopped doing that then, but I continued to fool around with programming. I learn a different language every couple of years.
Vibe coding.
Well, we'll get to that. I learn Ruby on Rails, understand Ruby. I went down the Clojure rat hole because I knew Lisp, or I knew a little Lisp from college. And, I learned Python because Python became kind of a mainstream thing that was reasonably accessible, but I never did much with it. And I would joke that one of the reasons I was writing books was because, number one, it was very similar to programming, except for the language didn't change, even though I think I've gotten better at writing in English. The language was basically static. And the tool didn't change. And granted, I went from using Microsoft Word to Google Docs. And now when I do a book, I usually start with Scrivener. And I've been playing around with fiction, and I'm using a thing called Sumo Write. And, there's a bunch of different, the tooling's a little different.
Yeah.
But it's pretty constant. But I kind of always equated that to programming. And over the winter break, when everybody was doing nothing and, or doing winter break stuff, and, I was kind of had a little bit of work to do, but everything had slowed down. Excuse me, before vibe coding became labeled, which I think is a brilliant label, I'd had a couple of people mention Cursor to me. And, I'd seen some of the AI and the Copilot stuff that Microsoft was blasting out endlessly about. And so I downloaded Cursor, and, I started doing some stuff in Cursor. And I'm going to tie this to Quantified Self. Have you played Dinostoids yet?
No.
So the first thing I wrote, which is up on the web, it's at Dinostoids.com.
Okay.
Is a game where you use a little ship in the middle of the game to shoot at dinosaurs. I happen to have a dinosaur fetish, so that's why Dinostoids. And I think anybody, probably most people that are listening know asteroids.
Sure.
And Atari still exists, and I actually got a nice email from the general counsel of Atari, who I
creep in my mind based off your quick description.
Didn't totally occur to me either. And he's a nice guy. He lives in Boulder. I've known him for a while, but I didn't know that he was the general counsel of Atari now. And we had a nice little talk, and he asked me a very direct question, which was, after we caught up a little bit, he said, "Are you planning on commercializing this?" And I said, "No, I just fucked around with it. It's free on the web. People can play it. It's kind of a good example of this." And he asked me very politely, would it be okay if we did a right to use license on the IP that's affiliated with Asteroids? And we're doing that, and it's totally non-controversial from my standpoint.
Sure.
And they're a public company, and they want to protect their IP, and that's fine. But fascinatingly, right, like literally just go Dinostoids.com, and I wrote that in about 40 hours. I don't know JavaScript. I know now more JavaScript than I knew before. I could probably read JavaScript and maybe do a little bit with it, but not very well. Of the 40 hours of work to make a fully functioning Dinostoids game, that includes things like a leaderboard, menus, database, free ships.
Right.
I have not put the flying saucer or the noises in yet. I got bored. And of course, I had bugs in it, or I had not bugs, but a security hole in it. So some guy figured out the security hole like in the first 12 hours, and his score is like 4 billion or something at top of the leaderboard. And he wrote a LinkedIn thing. I've hacked Brad Feld's Dinostoids.
Nice.
And my response was pretty cool. Good job. I guess I should have taken all that debugging code out. But if you think about that, what's happening is AI in today's instantiation is actually extraordinary at predicting the next word given a constrained rule set. And software development is as close to a constrained rule set as you're going to get. Language translations like that too. And of course, language translation has been for a long time something that Google has been excellent at, using many of these kinds of technologies. And just, I don't know why they weren't excellent at the other stuff that took other people to kick them in the butt to pay attention. On the quantified self front, the project I'm working on now is anybody on this that's listening that's about my age or older that has financial resources that goes to the doctor ever for anything, which is plenty. Think about how fucked up it all is. I live in a couple of places, so I have a couple of different places I go to the hospital or the doctor. I actually, for about half of the things, the doctors that I see, specialists or whatever, they use software called Epic Software from a company in Madison, Wisconsin. It's a very large software company. The other half of them use random different things. None of them connect. None of the data is able to be dealt with. And interestingly, if you go back in time, I have PDFs of my health data going all the way back to about 15 years ago, because that's when I started doing it, because I get interested in quantified self about that same time when I made the investment in Fitbit. And even Epic, at multiple different locations with my Epic record linked together, I can't get a good longitudinal view where time is on the x-axis. It's just a tabular spreadsheet. All my dates, and down the side, all of my lab tests. I can't even get that.
Yeah.
And
fractured is an easy word to use in healthcare.
Nuts.
Yeah.
But it's almost on purpose. Like it's almost like there's some kind of reason that it's done that way. So I talked to some friends. A friend that recently has cancer that's in remission and has had many doctor visits. Another friend who had a physical issue. I won't describe it specifically. I've struggled some with, in the last year, I had COVID really badly a year ago, and I've been struggling with some fatigue issues and trying to just figure out what's at the root cause of it. And I keep asking why. And I finally decided this is crazy. Like, I'm going to write, if the only customer in the world is me, I'm going to write software that integrates all of these disparate health records into one thing, along with my other data, because I have really fine-grained data on a continuous basis. I wear a Whoop on one wrist, which we're investors in. So it's the sort of, for us, we were Fitbit investors, and then now we're Whoop investors. So that continued journey. I have a Garmin on my other wrist, which I only use really for running data. But I have this enormous amount of data, including fine-grained. Like every time I do a workout, my Garmin data is actually in Strava. And my Garmin data is also in Training Peaks. And all this data is also in Apple Health. Sort of, but not really, because Apple Health kind of sucks. I mean, if you think Siri sucks and you actually try to use Apple Health for anything, it really sucks. And all of this stuff together, you step back from it. And if you talk to somebody who has financial resources, the first response to it is, I'd love to have something like that. Versus where everybody in tech, especially with AI, goes after right now, which is going after the healthcare infrastructure, the payers, the hospitals, the doctors, versus just sort of stepping back. And for me, it's been fascinating to think about it on two dimensions. This is the quantified self thing. The same way that Techstars exists to help founders be successful, I'm really perplexed that there isn't more software that exists in the world to help an individual person with their life. in whatever the dimensions are, so many of these things that start out that way either turn into artificial monetization machines, or the user is the data, which of course is a pernicious problem that exists everywhere now, versus people stepping back. I mean, there's so much stuff that's in the enterprise and in corporations that are aimed at that. And yeah, I got a zillion things on my iPhone that I pay subscriptions for, but there is not a thing that cuts across that in a way that's useful to me from a health perspective.
Would you get something implanted?
No.
That's a quick and strong no.
No, I'm not. I
think of Web3 and some people talk. Well, what's Web4? And it's just kind of a fun thing, thought exercise. But human plus machine.
Yeah, but you asked me a question that I could give you a quick no to. And let me tell you what I would do.
Yeah.
I said no because I am not into biohacking. When I went down the Quantified Self path, that's another fork. And that fork made me really uncomfortable for a variety of reasons. Some of them was the cultural dynamics around the experimentation was too far outside the zone for me.
Yeah.
I don't use drugs. I don't like drugs. There was something about it. I felt like it was going to, I'm already fragile enough. And that was just going to fuck me up more. However, I would be very, very comfortable in a decade. I am very comfortable right now, for example, putting a continuous glucose monitor on my arm and monitoring my glucose levels. And that's implanting something in me, but really what it is sticking a needle in your vein, right? So there's a level of it that I'm comfortable with because I don't feel like it's going to interfere with me. But I don't know whether it's 5 years or 10 years from now, I believe that the technology will have advanced where I won't be afraid of it anymore.
A lot of people are compelled by the idea, but they don't want to be first.
I'm just afraid of it, and I'll just call it for what it is.
Yeah.
But I'm not afraid of the idea of it. Whoop as a device, right? It has a sensor package that's gotten smaller with the new version that just came out. Advertisement for Whoop coming. Whoop 5.0 is really amazing. But it's still a sensor package that you have to wear on your wrist. It will get to the place where the sensor package can just be embedded in your body, or you swallow something and it's in your system. Think about whatever your sci-fi thing is. We're on that trajectory. However, here's a counter thing that's really uncomfortable for me. I'm really uncomfortable with everybody having always on recording devices that's able to immediately transcribe everything that's happening around them everywhere in the world. That makes me uncomfortable. I've been playing with different things. Every video conferencing system now, has their record AI, whatever. Zoom has its thing. And then there's a bunch of products that are like the add-ons that sit there and the note takers and all of that, all of which probably the note taker business goes away because that becomes part of Teams and Zoom. And Meet. But there's some other cool stuff. And, the one that got some hype recently and just did a big funding round, I think Spark led it, is Granola. And, I'd heard it. I'm like you. It's fine for somebody to tell me about something. I want to play with it. I want to download it. I want to see what it's like. And so, I download Granola, and I've been using Granola, and I'm not a note taker. So generally speaking, I don't write notes physically. I don't keep track of stuff.
I remember that about you, and it caught my attention because I'm not a note taker either. And sometimes I feel like people look down on that, but I find it to be such a distraction.
Well, some people need it because that's how they form memories, and that's how they process information. Sure. So that's fine. And some people, the reason I don't take notes is twofold. One is back to the beginning of this conversation. I won't then concentrate on what's happening. So I don't hear you if I'm taking notes. I get lost in that. The other for me is I have a very good, not a photographic memory, but a very good memory for a type of thing. And what I find is that I can get the summary processing of a discussion sticks in my brain. And I've gotten good at if I need to I need to do this, I need to do that, I need to do this, I need to do that. I write that down right after the meeting, or I write that down while the meeting's happening. So the to-do things I do. the granola experience has been fascinating because now I have this thing that sits on my laptop, and every time I have a meeting, it's just recording. And it doesn't alert the other person. It doesn't say I'm recording. It doesn't say, I don't ask the person, is it okay that this big block in my thing is a note taker? I don't have a screen that says, I'm just recording every meeting. And I found it to be so far kind of interesting. The mistakes it makes are actually kind of annoying. Because what you do is when you get your summary, you
end up spending just as much time editing.
No, it's not as much.
It's
not much. I did for example, I did a 30-minute consult with a doc the other day, and it took notes, and it got everything. It was really helpful. It got a bunch of stuff that I wouldn't have remembered if I tried to write down what happened afterwards. But it got a date wrong, 2022 instead of 2025, and when I sent that to. I sent it to Amy so she would see the summary of it, and her first response was not credible. You didn't have this in 2022. And I'm like, all right, yeah, I should have probably edited it before I sent it to you.
Those types of things are definitely interesting. And I wonder, just shifting one more gear toward kind of life and happiness, I enjoyed your episode with Ryan Holiday on the Daily Stoic.
Oh, yeah.
And talking a little bit about the why or the path that guides founders into interest around philosophy. And I was appreciative of the way you articulated how this is such an expression for individuals, and it often finds themselves interacting with others, and all of a sudden, like, the relationships aren't just about the business anymore. It becomes life and happiness at those deeper levels. And I know that I've really enjoyed, the weekly
the Entrepreneur's
Weekly Nietzsche is one of my favorites, and having that like interest in philosophy. What comes to mind when I just kind of open that that path to riff on?
Well, I mean, the book that I wrote with Dave Jilk, who was my first business partner.
That's right.
The Entrepreneur's Weekly Nietzsche was inspired by Ryan, right? Because he did the Daily Stoic for 365 days. We didn't feel like people could handle 365 Nietzsche quotes.
But I don't think there's that much through the lens of an entrepreneurial lifestyle. And so I really liked the twist that you took.
Well, that was a good twist, because when Dave studied, he's sort of functionally retired from commercial work, but he studies philosophy, he writes poetry, he does do some AI research, and in his studying philosophy, he started peppering me over time, or tossing at me Nietzsche quotes, and the Nietzsche quotes were interesting. Like, he'd say, does this remind you of entrepreneurship? Does this make you think of entrepreneurship? Does this feel like entrepreneurship?
Really?
Right. And he's been an entrepreneur. So like they were kind of rhetorical questions.
Was it a variety of different philosophies?
No,
or
just
was
Nietzsche.
It just
Nietzsche.
Nietzsche. Oh, okay.
Just Nietzsche. And Nietzsche, I didn't know much about Nietzsche. And at some point I said to him, isn't Nietzsche that Nazi? And Dave's response to it was no. Nietzsche was, what's the right word? Absconded, co-opted by the Nazis. His sister was a Nazi, but he died well before.
Who took the body of work, and
that's right. And then she kind of she took his literary corpus. But he was actually very much an anti-nationalist. I mean, he did not like the nationalist philosophy. Yeah. And he was, a lot of people know Nietzsche for a couple quotes. One is, if it doesn't, I just lost it. The one, if it doesn't kill you, I can't kill you. Lost it. My favorite is, if you stare into the abyss, careful of the monsters, for if you stare into the abyss, you will become one. So like just be careful of the engagement with monsters.
Yeah. And he chatted at length. We'll link that in the show notes for sure.
Yeah. He also has one, God is dead is kind of attributed to Nietzsche regularly. And the fascinating thing for me as I started to dig into it was, he's sort of a crossover philosopher between classical European Renaissance Enlightenment philosophy and contemporary philosophy. So he really challenged a lot of norms, and he challenged norms in how he wrote. For whatever, it's so funny, as you get older, you forget things. Whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. That's the famous Nietzsche quote.
Oh, I didn't know that was from. Okay.
And so like we ended up with a bunch of them, and I finally said to Dave, hey, this is Ryan Holiday thing. Let's do this. In that, what emerged was we had a lot of fun with it. I learned a lot about how to think about applying, as evidenced by the fact that we're still going. I'm not a quippy one-liner guy. But we took a bunch of quippy one-liners from Nietzsche, which were written in German in the late 1800s, and we turned them into interesting essays about entrepreneurship. And then we generally got somebody to tell a story that related to the essay more or less. And it was really satisfying to me because it fits with my writing approach and my writing style. Anybody who's written any of my books, I've tried to make them conversational. I've tried to make them very accessible. I tell a lot of stories. This new book, GiveFirst, it's not a memoir, but it's got a whole bunch of Brad stories in it. One of the feedback I got from the first draft that I did that I then stuck on the shelf for about a year because I didn't really feel like dealing with working on it was, hey, Brad, way too many Techstars stories, not enough Brad stories. So I knew I had to delete a bunch of stories and, put a bunch of my own into it. But I like that. And I like that. I wish more people wrote that way in the context of trying to get ideas across. You get a lot of people who write a book that's their thought piece. That's a thought piece that almost feels like a manufactured thing or a programmatic thing. That's like at one end of the spectrum. Or it's it's a memoir biography where the lessons are woven in, but they're not really explicitly stated. And then you have the other end of the spectrum, which I think the podcasting phenomena has made very easy to produce, but has actually made quite hard to get the ideas through, which is if you have somebody that just sort of tosses out one idea or two ideas or three ideas, or you have a podcast where you have endless guests, where those guests don't, and it's one of the things I like about the way you do it, you let it unroll, right? It might be around one point, but it's a point that's linked to a story, rather than it's a point that I'm trying to hit you over the head with to justify. That's my approach. And frankly, that's how I learn from people. I want to hear the story. I don't want them to say, you should do this.
Yeah. One fun fact, the developmental editor that I used in my book was an introduction from you.
Oh, it was Pete?
Yes.
Yeah.
And he, he challenged the name, You Don't Need This Book. He wanted me to change it. But I was like, sorry, man, that's it. Yeah, I'll add a subtitle. But he also said that it was a bit sterile. I purposefully removed the word I so that the reader could kind of think of it through their own experience. But the sidebars was his big suggestion that created space for the stories that connected to whatever topic it was. Yep. You're probably curious. The other big takeaway was the introduction, introducing the reader to what to experience. So cheers, Pete. Thanks for the...
Hi, Pete.
Yeah, absolutely. But I have to assume that the philosophy-flavored book was a shift compared to some of the other books that you've done. And one of my favorite takeaways from it, and I've got a lot of them actually, but I loved how you wrote about a healthy obsession. We talk about passion, Pat, the cliche of how passion is everything, but it's almost another level that's required.
Yeah. Well, for me, I've said for a long time, passion in the context of entrepreneurship is bullshit. And for two reasons. One is passion is something that indexes towards extroverts, not introverts. And there's a lot of very successful introverts. It's very hard for an introvert to exude passion. It's just not natural, just in terms of their personality. So it's artificial. It also indexes towards people who are sales-oriented, who are good at selling, promoting, evangelizing. And it's hard for somebody who is not that archetype to exude, not to be passionate about something, but to exude passion. And then the last, which has been a long-running cliche of mine, is that passion is easy to fake. This glass of water is the most amazing glass of water ever.
Have you seen
in the history of this glass of water? I mean, it's clear.
Oh, it's sparkling.
It's not moving. The reflections in this glass of water are just spectacular.
I love
just such utter
This is
bullshit.
the actual exact shape you want to drink water out of.
Right. And so passion is bullshit. It's marketing, right? Versus obsession. And my clinical diagnosis that I got in my 20s when I was struggling with anxiety and depression was obsessive compulsive disorder. And I've talked about it a lot. I've written about it a lot. There's plenty of stuff on the web about it, including in long form. So I won't torture this audience that's now on 2.5 and has said, Jesus, Audible should really have a 3.0 speed.
This is an audio book now, I think. I think we've transcended out of podcasting.
But what I realized was that the word obsession, they're not obsessive compulsive disorder, that is not a superpower. That is not a good thing. But obsession does have characteristics that can be good. There's healthy obsession and unhealthy obsession. And I've now shifted my language around that when I talk to people, founders about it. I don't talk about obsession anymore because I think too many people confused it with unhealthy obsession.
Yeah.
What I say now, and this is the definition of obsession that I was trying to do in the Nietzsche book, was you were put on planet Earth to work on this problem right now. It's not that you have to do it for the rest of your life.
I like the addition of right now.
It's right now. This is the thing that you were put on this planet to work on or solve or address right now. And if you don't feel that in the business you're starting or the business you're in or the job you've got or the experiences you're having with whatever your work is, and I apply it mostly to founders, but I think it's generally applicable. Take a step back and rethink it. It is so much easier to make progress with something that you were really intended to be working on in this environment that's already incredibly difficult to be successful. I mean, it's so fucking hard to create a successful company from nothing. And as an investor, I've learned this. If I don't have deep affinity, if I don't have deep affinity for the company, for the product that the company's creating, I don't want to invest anymore. And the reason is I've invested in so many companies, I don't really care about their product that much. It's a great founder, but I just didn't give a shit about the product. Every company I've ever been involved in that's been successful has had at least one near-death experience, period. And many of them have had multiples.
Sure.
And the ups and downs are hard. And there's lots of stuff that you really are going to have to fight through, even when you've had success, to continue to sustain success, right? I mean, Clayton Christensen's innovation dilemma has been forever. Like, it's just not a straight line that continues on. It's not a perpetual motion machine. It is so hard as an investor who has a portfolio of multiple companies, a lot, to keep my head in something when it goes south, or goes sideways even, when I just don't really care about the product that much. It's so hard.
I could see it devolve into, okay, good, finally.
Well, you think, for founders out there that have raised money from VC firms and no other founders who have raised money from VC firms, there's kind of two flavors. Flavor one is the VC firm that when things start to get tough, they either really torture you. Well, I guess it's three things they do. One is they torture you. One is they try to take advantage of the situation in a predatory way. And the third is they say, fuck it, I'm out. It's not worth it. It's too hard. I'm going to go work on something else that's going to work. And that's particularly true when the portfolios get bigger and bigger. There's another style, and I would put, my friends at Union Square Ventures or USV are definitely of this style. It's you fight till the end. Like, there is an end. Like, you either, do fail, or you collectively decide it's not worth it anymore, or, you finally decide, like, we're not building a big thing, and so let's find a home for this thing, or we can't find a home for this thing, and we're not motivated to do this anymore. Like, there is an end, but you fight till the end. And I'm of that. That was Len Fassler, who we talked about earlier. I learned that from him. Like, it was just this tenacity to stay after it. It's so hard, though, if you don't care about the product,
I could see the decision being clouded by that lack of interest. Yeah.
Why am I spending my time on this thing I don't care about?
I really like The Dip. If you're thinking about when and what to quit by Seth Godin.
Seth's book is really great.
That one is a good reminder because winners quit all the time. It's just the right thing at the right time.
Well, in a successful company, a successful company in my mind is simply a continuous series of experiments. You have a hypothesis, you run an experiment. Most of those experiments fail. The key is to learn from the failed experiment, create a new hypothesis, run a new experiment. When the experiment works, do a shit ton more of that. That is a successful business. And you're just continuing to do that over and over and over again in the course of the business. Now, it's kind of fascinating. Will AI help us run those experiments faster?
Yeah.
Will they allow us to run those experiments with less friction? Yeah, kind of instinctively, the answer is yes. And so in some ways, it should enhance the ability of founders to be successful. However, if you don't approach it from the standpoint of running experiments, you can imagine kind of the opposite happening, which is you put a whole bunch of energy against something that's destined not to work, and you don't learn anything from it. And you outsource your thinking to an algorithm rather than actually using critical thinking to help you get to the next place. And so there's a lot of interesting stuff in terms of, the evolution of work today around this context that I really think comes back to the same thing, which is, it is not, when you look at success, it's not because the person got it right or the company got it right. It's because there was this effort continually of trying new things, failing at stuff, owning the failure, learning from the failure. That's the thing that is the miss. People are afraid to accept that it failed, and then they don't do the hard work to learn from the failure. They move on to the next thing. Or they get angry about it, or they try to justify what's going on, or they blame it on something else, or it's exogenous, or it's circumstantial, or it wasn't my fault. Doesn't fucking matter. Learn from it. And then run another experiment.
Right. All right, Brad. Whew. Thank you. This has been such a journey, and I thought it might be
We've
fun.
got like an hour to go, right?
Yeah. I don't know if the speed tool can keep people in tune, but
no, you have nobody listening at this point, so you can say anything you want.
That's funny.
This is an Easter egg. If you are listening at this point,
this is the Easter egg because this is the Quickfire. Okay. So it's the challenge to tighten the response into just a word or a few.
Well, I can do that.
All right.
Maybe.
Do we spell startup with or without a dash?
No dash. And no capital U.
Thank you. Do you ever misspell entrepreneur?
Yes.
So do I.
Such a fucking hard word to type.
Damn E and U at the end, man.
That's why I use founders.
Yeah, there you go. How do you describe a complex adaptive system to a child? That is such a hard question.
Oh, it's good. It's good. No, I'm trying to get a short one.
Well, to answer concisely, I mean.
Yeah. Let's go to that anthill over there. You see those ants? You see that anthill? All right. You got a cookie? All right, cool. Let's do this. Break off a little piece of the cookie and let's put it over here. And let's watch it for a little while. See how the ants are now starting to go to the cookie? Isn't that cool? Now, let's break off another piece of cookie and put it on the other side of the anthill. And let's watch it for a little while. Look what the ants are doing. Oh, do you see how they broke the cookie into two pieces? Now, I really like ants, so let's not do this. But imagine what would happen if you kicked the anthill. That's a complex adaptive system.
Nice. We'll title this episode Anthills. All right, another one. Maybe weird or best is probably a fair answer to signal when it's time to raise financial capital.
Best signal when, and it's at different stages, when people are ripping the thing out of your hands.
Yeah, when demand is more than you can supply.
And of course, you need to raise money before that often to get to the point where you have a thing, although you have to raise less money than I think a lot of people raise to get to a place where you have a thing. But I think you want to raise the least amount of money you need, and you do need, and spend, modestly until you get to a point where people are ripping the thing out of your hands. When that happens, that's when you go.
Nice. All right. A fun, challenging final question before you write an investment check.
7. What? A fun, challenging question before I write an investment check?
Do you have one?
No, I don't have one.
I thought you might have like some.
No, I don't. That's not how I think about how I go when I make an investment. I used to.
This is Quickfire.
Okay. It used to be, my decision, not a question, my decision used to be people and product. And now my decision is still people and product in a domain that I feel like I have a clue about.
And interest, as you just described.
And affinity for the product.
Yeah, right. Favorite epiphany while running? You go on some long runs and you're alone for an extended amount of time. Do you have one that you
I have one that I remember very clearly.
Okay.
It was an Aspen run. I had been into, I went down a Buddhist thread. I'd been listening. I usually run without listening to anything, but when I go on longer and longer runs, sometimes I feel like I need something. So I'll listen to usually books. I don't listen to music very often, although sometimes like on mile 16, I'll put Red Hot Chili Peppers on because I just need to get something. This is Quickfire, right? The epiphany was, and this is without anything being listened to, this is it. I remember it. I remember where I was in Aspen. It was probably 6 or 7 years ago. And it was just like that, like chills, like this is it. Like, don't miss this.
That feels good to enjoy the silence right there. Does anything trouble you when you're alone?
Not much.
Does this might be connected to that epiphany?
Yeah, not much. I love being alone. I'm my hierarchy of how I like to spend my time. I actually think now I like to spend my time more with Amy than alone, because we have spent an enormous amount of time together since COVID. And prior to COVID, we spent very little time together because I traveled all the time. And I had a lot of alone time because all that time in hotel rooms and sleeping and that sort of thing. So I think my hierarchy is I like to be with her the most, but then second, I love to be alone.
I do too.
And I'm not scared anymore of like anything. Like even if I'm alone in an uncomfortable place, I probably have a little physical discomfort every now and then, depending on where I am. But I've been out alone in the middle of nowhere long enough in different circumstances where, when I use the Milarepa thing, when I start to feel uncomfortable when I'm alone, I don't fight it. I just let the demon be there. And then the fear goes away. If people don't know the Milarepa thing, it's, I wrote a blog post once, something new is fucked up in my world every day. And I talk about the parable.
Now in contrast, versus being alone, what's your favorite concert experience?
I hate concerts.
Ooh.
I really don't. I don't like live music. I'm not a live music guy. I can't stand it. Too many people, too many smells, too many stuff. However, I go on a trip with 3 of my closest, oldest friends. We've been friends for 40 years. Dave Joke, Will Herman, Warren Katz. And we go to random places and we have a wonderful time together. We went to Las Vegas on a trip, and they're very funny trips because we're nerds. We don't gamble. We don't stay out late. I don't drink anymore. Some of them drink, but it's not like a drunken slosh fest at Las Vegas. It's more just hanging out. Going to the pinball machine, the pinball museum.
Wait, we waited this long to realize that you like pinball?
I love pinball.
Yo.
Okay.
I'm good at pinball.
All right. Well, I'm not very good at it, but I like it.
I like it too.
And I like old video games. I like stuff from like the 1960s and 1970s, the really old shit.
When you come to Des Moines, I will show you some pinball for sure. And I like the new stuff that's got the thickness of electronic engineering. This is the Quickfire.
I know. I'm messing it up. See, everything's 20% too long. I like new stuff too. But so we went and heard the Eagles at the Sphere. And that was fucking awesome. And I'm not an Eagles fan. I mean, I grew up with the Eagles. It doesn't even
matter. And that type of sensory overload.
The Eagles were my childhood band. Like I was in junior high school when,
all right, that's
Hotel California came out.
Nice.
But I'm not, like I like Joe Walsh, and I don't really care much for any of the rest of it. And it was awesome. So I go to the Sphere again. but I never need to go to Red Rocks again. I never. I mean, if you're a music person, Red Rocks is amazing, but I never need to go to Red Rocks again.
You would probably hate the intensity of the environments that I find, and I like to do these like EDM expeditions alone because the lightness that you have while you are around everyone, you are able to do whatever you want.
I think if I like drugs, I might like live music, but I don't. I'm scared of drugs, so I don't do drugs. And every time I've ever been to a concert of any sort, and the music I like, I'm a product of AC/DC and Rush and Stadium Rock, so I like really loud shit, and I like EDM and the stuff I listen to, and I actually like. It's funny, I like easy listening rap. It's like Eminem is easy listening rap. Like,
there you go.
That's the kind of rap I like. And I guess I was supposed to call it hip hop, and the experience, like 15 minutes in, I want to fuck out. Like I just can't. I bounce. I can't stay it, so I don't do it anymore.
All right, that's fair. That's fair. Well, something you do still do is appreciate fine art. I know that's an element of your life that you and Amy share, and I'm curious, like, how do you find yourself most commonly observing paintings versus sculptures versus drawings? Like, is there a common thread that you feel in your appreciation of art?
Yeah, my mom's an artist, so this came from that. I love abstract art. And
telling your own story through it.
Yeah, and I like to stand and stare at it. And I like to stand and stare at it without a lot of people around me.
How long is the longest you've ever stared at a piece?
Probably 5-10 minutes. I mean, it's not like hours.
Have you ever done silent meditation?
Oh, yeah.
How long have you gone silent?
I have, well, this is a fun question. Longest I've ever done a meditation session is probably 90 minutes. However, Amy has done a 10-day silent meditation retreat 3 times.
3 times.
So I've wandered up to it. I actually almost did it once and then canceled. I think I just chickened out. It's kind of like with Lasix. I almost got Lasix once, and the day of, I chickened out.
Really, the day of?
Yeah, and it's sort of like when you're feeling,
I don't want people touching my eyes either. I'm glad I don't.
When the anxiety is enough where I'm really feeling uncomfortable, I'm like, this is optional. I don't have to do this.
Oh, well, my friends, thank you again, Brad. This has been something I'll always appreciate, and it's a special time.
Ben, I'm happy to do episode 100.
This is kind of a milestone moment.
I mean, I like prime numbers, and I like powers of 3. But I also like, 100's a good number.
It's a nice even finish.
It is.
In fact, I saved a very special number 3 of 100 for your collector hardback edition.
Sweet.
Yeah, and it took us 2 hours to get here, but thank you again for the contribution that you shared.
And don't forget to change your speed from 3x back down to 1x for your next podcast.
But the extended experience is something we've hinted at, and I wonder if season 3 could be something in the wild more often like this, and perhaps a little bit more of extended conversations to see where things take us.
You're looking more and more like Joe Rogan as I sit here.
I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing.
I don't either.
Well, let's call this thing finished, my friend, and enjoy some dinner together after this. Before we go, I always like to allow our featured guests to drop the mic, right? So maybe a life mantra vibe. I know that's maybe hard to just land on one, but if you had one little nugget here, I am so thankful for our time, but I like to finish with the voice of our featured guest. So Brad Feld, episode 100, season 2 finale. Please take the stage and finish us in style.
I'll end with a tribute to Len Fassler with a line from a story that's in my new book, GiveFirst. They can't kill you and they can't eat you.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of You Don't Need This Podcast. We hope you enjoyed this weekly dose of innovative energy. Thanks to all who make this show possible. Be sure to smash that subscribe button, and I'd love to learn more about what you're building. Hit me up over at benmcdougal.com, and until next time, may the best of your todays be the worst of your tomorrows. Keep building.